The rain across parts of Scotland and northern England will continue for a time, but it should start to break up as we go through into the afternoon and early evening. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers around, not as many as we've seen through today, and they're not looking quite as intense, less likely to have the odd rumble of thunder, but still some heavy ones possible. And temperatures in the north starting to drop down as we get a northerly wind making its way across the country. That northerly wind then will push its way southwards across pretty much the whole of the country as we go through Thursday, and so that means it is going to be a chillier day, but much fewer showers around. In fact, it's looking largely dry. Yes, some showers around coastal parts, but many places having a dry day on Thursday and sticking with that drier theme until the weekend. Bye-bye.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest on the M1 in South Yorkshire. The inside lane stays closed northbound at junction 38. The Huntersfield turn-off for the second day emergency bridge repair works are underway after a lorry drove into the central reservation yesterday morning. And in Northamptonshire, on the Northampton-Kettering stretch of the A43, the road remains shut between Sywell and Hannington. Investigation works underway following a serious accident yesterday afternoon. On the M1 in Bedfordshire, one lane's closed southbound from junction 12 to 11A towards Dunstable and towards Luton, where a car's broken down in the inside lane, not being helped by the fact a lane's closed directly opposite because of an obstruction. On the M4 in Berkshire, a lane remains closed westbound from junction 11 to 12, heading away from Reading, where a lorry's broken down. And in West Sussex at Crawley, the Brighton Road blocked near the train station, the level crossing barrier is not working. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You really can. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Live with me, Nigel Farage, tonight. Tom Tugendhat is out of the Tory leadership race. Who is going to make the last two? I'll give you my prediction. As we find out that 1 in 100 in the UK are now estimated to be illegal migrants, the highest in Europe, and 3 former SAS soldiers write a letter, devastating letter to the Times today, saying, because of the European Convention on Human Rights, they fear the future recruitment for the force. All of that coming up in just a moment. First, let's get the news with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. James Cleverly has overtaken Robert Jenrick to the top spot in the latest round of voting to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Cleverly leads the pack with 39 votes, Robert Jenrick second with 31 and Kemi Badenoch third on 30. Tom Tugendhat has now been eliminated from the race with only 20 votes. The final 2 will be decided from the remaining 3 candidates at the next round of voting tomorrow afternoon. The Director General of MI5 has warned that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on the rise again, with an increased terror risk linked to the conflict in the Middle East. In a stark warning at the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre, Ken McCullen revealed that Iran has been linked to at least 20 deadly plots in the UK over the past 2 years. He says both groups are attempting to export terror, highlighting the recent deadly attacks in Moscow as a brutal demonstration of what ISIS are still capable of. As the conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies, MI5 is on high alert for potential domestic repercussions. Sir Keir Starmer is set for a crucial talks in Berlin, joining leaders from the US, France and Germany this Saturday. The meeting will focus on the ongoing war in Ukraine and the escalating situation in the Middle East. It comes as tensions rise in Lebanon, prompting urgent diplomatic efforts among so-called Quad nations. The Prime Minister's spokesperson says the meeting is highlights for the UK's commitment to tackling international issues alongside its allies. Now, water companies in England and Wales have been ordered to return more than £157 million to customers for failing to meet crucial targets on pollution and interruptions to supplies. Ofwat has demanded that the money comes off bills for households and businesses from next year. It follows a previous order to repay £114 million from last year. The UK population has seen its largest annual increase in size since 1971. The Office for National Statistics estimates that the total population grew by 1% in just a year, reaching 68.3 million by mid-2023, covering England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The ONS says migration was the main factor behind the latest rise, as deaths exceeded births by around 16,300 in the same period. And finally, as Hurricane Milton makes its way towards Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis says if you stay, you will die. Satellite images show the storm churning through the Gulf of Mexico, with winds almost reaching 180 miles an hour. Forecasts are warning of 8 to 12-foot storm surges, the highest ever for the region, and of course widespread flooding. It comes just 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene claimed over 200 lives in the southeastern parts of the United States. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour's time, but now it's back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Until a few years ago, I bet you'd never even blimmin' heard of the 1922 committee, which of course is the committee of Conservative members of Parliament. But given that the party is about to elect its sixth leader, they're back, of course, in the news today, and its chairman, Bob Blackman, read out the scores on the doors in the middle of this afternoon as to who was to be eliminated from the Conservative leadership race.
And declare the result of the third ballot in the leadership contest. 120 votes were cast, and the votes for each candidate were as follows: Kemi Badenoch, 30, James Cleverly, 39, Robert Jenrick, 31, and Tom Tugendhat, 20. So as a result of that ballot, Tom Tugendhat is eliminated from the contest.
So, as predicted, Tom Tugendhat is out, and as I said to you last week, when I sat and watched very, very carefully the speeches that they all gave at the Conservative Party conference, it was clear to me that Cleverly was the one that impressed. I'm not talking policy, I'm talking about looking like somebody who actually was in command, and Cleverly was miles better than the other. The big disappointment for those on the centre-right of the Conservative Party, I think, to be honest, was the performance of Jenrick. You know, if you go out and speak without notes and wander around the stage, you have to have the charisma to back it up. And frankly, I don't think that Jenrick had that. And that's why his vote is down, and Badenoch kind of is up a little bit but holds steady. The next round of voting is tomorrow. Who makes the last two? Well, I'll tell you, Cleverly clearly makes the last two. And in fact, you would expect, in policy and positioning terms, him to get many of the Tugendhat votes. So who makes it through between Jenrick on 31 and Badenoch on 40? Here is my guess. My guess is that the Cleverly camp and the Conservative establishment will lend a few votes to Kemi Badenoch because they don't want Jenrick, because Jenrick wants to do things like leave the ECHR, and that would never do. So that's my prediction. That's what'll happen. It'll be Cleverly versus Badenoch. That's my view. Keen to know from you, who do you think makes the last two? And, oh, by the way, do you actually care? Please email farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined in tonight's endeavour by Sir George Howarth, former Labour Member of Parliament and Junior Minister under Tony Blair, and Lord Monckton, hereditary peer and former Conservative political advisor. So, Lord Monckton, who do you think makes the last two?
I think you've got it absolutely right. And after all, do you really want Jenrick to go through, given that I think he's asked for your retirement, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, fat chance of that, I'd say.
So I think it's Jenrick that's going to get the retirement, and I think the other two will go through, and I think it probably will be Cleverly that gets it. I agree with you as to the speeches at the party conference. He was clearly the man who had the presence of a potential Prime Minister. And the others remind me of a ballot in the Labour Party a few years ago where there were two candidates, Michael Foot and Ted Short, and the ballot paper, in a wonderful cartoon in The Spectator, which just said, Foot, Short, and one Labour MP saying to the other, neither of them has the stature to do this.
Well, George, you'll remember those days, of course.
I do. I wasn't an MP at the time, but I was very politically active, yeah. I mean, to answer your question, which two... I think your assessment is right. It'll be Badenoch and Cleverly, whichever way round.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that whichever of them, even if it had been Robert Jenrick, the problem the Conservative Party have got is that they don't really know where they want to be. They don't know whether they're going to be further to the right or a bit towards the centre.
And they're very divided.
Pardon?
They're very divided in Parliament.
They are, and I've always been shocked. You know, the Labour Party has always had a reputation for falling out with each other, and sometimes we do. But privately, when you talk to some of the Tory MPs, certainly in the last Parliament, the divisions between them was visceral and vicious all at the same time, and I'm not sure that's gone away.
And that's, of course, why reform came through, because a huge wing of the Tory party simply wasn't represented by anyone.
Yeah, and voters deserve to know what they're voting for.
Exactly.
And I think that's the point, isn't it, you know? Now, moving on from that, because it probably doesn't matter that much, really. Moving on from that, I mean, the story, George, that, you know, that we know of, 1 in 100 of the UK population are here illegally, which is far more than France or Germany or Italy, despite all the things that we're told. Pretty sure. I mean, David Blunkett, I mean, I'm going back 20 years, but David Blunkett as Home Secretary said, well, how can I tell how many people are here illegally? It may even be more than this. It's pretty shocking, isn't it?
I mean, it's a worry, and, you know, any country has to have control of its borders if it's going to have control over what happens to all the public services, for example.
Yes.
But I think the problem that we've got now is the same problem as the previous government had, and that is people who are crossing the channel mostly illegally, and well, in fact, in all cases illegally. And how do you get a grip on that? And it's early days for this government, but I think they're going to head for cooperation between other European states on a bilateral basis, because we're no longer in the EU. And that has to be the key to it.
If the EU allow that?
Well, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, because although there are parts of the EU that would like, you know, quite happy with levels of immigration as long as it's not coming to them.
Yeah, quite.
Other parts, France, Germany and others, have really got worries about it, and there is, on their part, an imperative for cooperation if you're going to get on top of it.
But I would argue, George, that all the while people are coming across the Mediterranean in large numbers, that's a far bigger concern to them than those that transit through their countries and come to Britain.
Well, it is, but I mean, the routes are different, for example. So, You know, people have got to go, say, from North Africa right across Europe to get to France so they can cross the Channel. And if we can control, first of all, the routes to get to the Channel, and secondly, if we can get control over what happens in the Channel, and, you know, the border force proposals that the governments have got hopefully will help to do that, then you've got a chance of tackling it. At the moment, you know, as the last government found out, you can have all of the rhetoric in the world, but if it doesn't work, then you need to rethink it.
George puts the case for what Labour are trying to do. Yeah. I rather think, Christopher, what happened with the last government was they realised this issue was going right up the agenda.
Yeah.
And the reason is not just numbers, the reason is a sense of unfairness. You know, how is it that our son and daughter can't get on the social housing list? Why is it our rents are going through the roof? How is it we can't get a GP appointment? How is it these people get four-star hotels? I think it was the unfairness of it. But isn't the reason really, when you think about all the promises that Boris Johnson made, Rishi Sunak sort of staking his premiership on stopping the boats, isn't the real reason that unless you deport people who come illegally, they're going to keep coming?
You have to do that. You also have to send the right signals. Margaret Thatcher had this problem very early in her premiership, and she then got a backbencher to ask her a question. What are you going to do about illegal immigration? And she stood up and went to the dispatch box and said, if you're thinking of coming to this country illegally, then you can think again. We now have in place the toughest regime for handling those of you who come here illegally. You will be arrested, you will be detained, you will be sent straight back where you came from, and that will be that. And they stopped coming. The fact that you send a signal is good, but the signal that was sent by the last Conservative government, a great friend of yours and mine, I won't say who, was approached. He has a large country house in Taunton, and he was approached by the Home Office, and they said, we'd like you to lend us your house for 7 years, and we'll give you £1 million if you'll do that. And we're going to put illegal migrants into it. And can you imagine if you're some Albanian, you get put into the swankiest house in the West Country. The first thing is get on the phone to your mate and say, you've got to come to Britain. This is paved with gold.
There is some truth in that.
And it's this kind of utter stupidity on the part of the Home Office, which is just about the worst of all the government departments.
What is interesting, George, to me, is if you go back, I mentioned Blunkett. Actually, Blair and Blunkett were really tough on this.
Yes.
Were really tough on this. And that Labour government were deporting illegals in very, very big numbers, and yet don't appear to have the power to do it now. And I'm going to put it to you that it's the creeping power of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg that has caused this problem.
Personally, I don't think it's the problem that some people make out. And I was involved as a Home Office Minister in introducing that legislation.
Yeah.
And we introduced it for very good reasons. It was repatriating European law into English law so that people could access it more easily. Now, with the passage of time, you need to review everything. But I think there's possibility that, for example, and I'm not advocating this, but I think there needs to be the potential for a derogation, for example, on certain aspects of it, but that has to be negotiated. You can't just unilaterally declare it.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. That we
but you also have to deal with the French.
We finish up this segment talking about ECHR, derogations, and how we deal with it. And after the break, I'm going to be joined by three men who've given the country great service in the SAS. And I was quite shocked to pick up the Times newspaper first thing this morning and see a letter from all three of them. Most unusual for those that have served in the SAS to break cover and talk about it, but they have. And their worry also is the European Convention of Human Rights being written into British law, what it means for court cases that can go back for many, many years, which they see as persecution of former SAS soldiers, and what that could mean for future recruitment of our crack regiment. All of that in just a moment.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're talking catchphrases and jingles because, of course, instantly recognisable and sometimes a little annoying in the case of the Go Compare one, perhaps. An iconic advertising jingle can stay in your head all day and sometimes stand the test of time. Sound expert and music designer for some of the world's most renowned companies, Michael Boumendil, joins us now. Good morning, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
First of all, what is the secret ingredient, the secret recipe for a hit jingle that stands the test of time over the decades?
Well, I have to say the secret 100 years ago is not the secret today, because today all the brands are using music. So the first secret is to stand out, is to make something different, to do something interesting. The other thing I believe is to do something that is true to the brand, that is talking to you. You know, it's not only about the memorability, but it's about telling something about the brand. You know, when I hear you, your voice, your tone of voice says not only who you are, I can recognize your voice, but it says a lot about your mood, your personality. So the other reason why we make successful jingles is because they're catchy, because they're different, but also because they say something to us that is interesting, and finally keeping this link between the brand and the customers.
Michael, tell us about your involvement in the new Maybelline jingle. This makes me, I haven't heard it, but it makes me a little bit sad because I was an avid Maybelline concealer user for many years. Other brands are available, but the jingle was the main reason why I got bought into it.
You don't have to be sad, because we kept most of the legacy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I said to you, who is going to make the last two in the Tory leadership race, and does it matter? Helen says it will not matter who leads. They've 120 Liberals sitting behind them. No change, no lessons learned. They're not all Liberals, but many of them are. Laura says it doesn't matter whoever becomes the next Conservative leader. They are a spent force. Well, there you are. There's some pessimism. And David says, I guess Cleverly is the best one from a reform standpoint, as he is just more of the same from a defunct Tory party and will offer no threat of a revival. Well, we will see. Now, I picked up my Times newspaper this morning and was quite surprised to see a letter from three gentlemen that says, 30 years after being the command team of 22 SAS, we are setting aside reservations about discussing our service because the individuals we led then are gravely threatened today. A very unusual thing for us to see, and I'm joined by these gentlemen here in the studio today. On my left is Jamie Lowther-Pinkerton, after service with the Irish Guards, served with the SAS in the First Gulf War, the Balkans, and went on to become Private Secretary to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. I'm joined also on my left by George Sim, former Regimental Sergeant Major, and I'm joined on my right by Aldwyn White, retired SAS commander, who went on to receive a commission from the Sultan of Oman. Gentlemen, I'll go through one by one. Now, we've obviously discussed on this programme before the Legacy Act, those from Northern Ireland up to 50 years ago that can be prosecuted. There has been some debate about what the SAS may or may not have done in Afghanistan. And, you know, we all know there are some basic rules of warfare that have to be obeyed. We think perhaps of how Japanese or German forces treated British soldiers in World War II, and you know, we know there are rules there somewhere. Interesting, folks at home, that despite this letter, the BBC have not had these gentlemen on today. Jamie, we'll start with you, please. What is the nub of this problem?
I think the reason that we wrote the letter is because, and it pertains specifically to our soldiers 30 years ago, the ones we commanded, and we're not entering any other debate on that. The reason really is responsibility, and between the three of us, we sent these fellas into difficult circumstances, and they did their job to the best of their ability. And actually, at the time, that was found to be so, that they had acted lawfully. But ever since, they have been hounded. And it's not so much that this will lead to a prosecution. It won't. What it is, it's the process, which is, some people have been 2 or 3 decades being chased for no cause, and the process, as I say, is the thing. And frankly, it goes to a greater depth, this, in that the result is that you will not have people who will volunteer in the future to do the sorts of things.
For fear they'll be hounded legally.
Yes, because if you go into these circumstances and you have half an eye on what the consequence will be 10, 20, 30 years down the line, then you're simply not going to be able to do your duty.
George, how do these lads feel 3 decades on?
Well, I know of a number of cases. Certainly 2 of them have had serious mental problems. One of them was actually convicted in a court in Scotland as a part of the process of the Article 2 inquests, which was grossly unfair, while he was mentally ill. And the other guy has spent 25 years now answering questions, the same questions that keep coming round and round, and it doesn't appear he's getting any better.
And the accusations are that they basically kill people in cold blood.
Well, it's strange that an army does that, isn't it? It's our job. The nation state demands that we defend our people. We sign up to defend the crown, which is the emblem of our country and our people. We're managed through the MOD, and we engage in that process. The problem is we are judged by a process that is controlled by Strasbourg.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's interesting. We were talking in the last segment, folks, about this. Albin, I mean, there have to be rules somewhere, don't there? I mean, I completely understand what George just said. I completely understand the point made by Jamie that these boys were sent in to very difficult circumstances. But there are still rules.
Well, there's a complete set of rules, and we're brought up on them right from the start. You have the Geneva Convention, you have the rules of war, as it were, and we have rules of engagement within. Any of the operations that we undertake are sanctioned by ministers, approved by the chain of command, and then executed on the ground. My basic point is that if you ask a soldier to go out and put himself directly in danger, in what will be, because inevitably it will be a confused circumstance, and that might actually lead to a fatality. There will be afterwards absolutely 100% full forensic, as it were, debrief and post-operational process. And it gets closed out at that point. If there has been wrongdoing, there has been wrongdoing. But the point we've got now is that because of Article 2, any complainant later on can come in and take a case against that soldier.
And let's just be clear about this, Jamie. We're talking here about the European Convention on Human Rights, written, of course, into British law under the Human Rights Act of 1998. And, of course, it can also go to the European Court in Strasbourg. Just explain Article 2 and why that's causing a problem.
I mean, I think the important thing to realise here is that, to my mind, it's not actually the issue with the European Court of Human Rights per se, because when that was drawn up in the 1940s, it was drawn up by people who had been through the war. Now, they understood the nature of combat. And within the ECHR, they put in Article 15,
which enables people to derogate in time of war and in time of emergency, so that actually there's an understanding there of what warfare is all about.
And that's what you're asking for in your letter.
That's what we're
you're
asking.
saying, and this is what they write.
Yeah.
We ask the new government to activate Article 15 of the ECHR, offered to signatories as a means in times of war and other public emergencies of derogating from Article 2, which is the protection for right to life.
And don't get me wrong, we're not asking, we're not sort of pointing the finger at this government. Our purpose, because we're looking after our boys from 30 years ago, is to say, please, will you review this?
I think there's a point to add to that, if I may, just quickly.
Do, please.
The point being that if you put people off joining, volunteering and that, you'll eventually lose the capability which is actually essential to your national strategy of counter-terrorism. And that therefore leaves you open to the terrorists.
Can I ask, and I absolutely understand that the three of you are as apolitical as you can be. Did you, I mean, this has been going on for years. Did the last government not listen, George? I mean...
Well, it began in 98. As you know, and it came into effect in 2000. And what you've had is this incremental change to the interpretation of Article 2. And what prompted me, I wrote the original letter to the MOD 2 years ago, and it was ignored. What a shock. And I wrote again in April this year, before all this latest furore kicked off. And I was prompted by an article I read by Charles Moore, who was talking about activist judges, and I said, you know, that's the point.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is it's like a competition to see who can be the most right on and the most what's that word, progressive, and that's fine. But the government has to decide: do you want soldiers who fight and die to defend the people of this country, or do you want armed social workers? Because where we're going is in the latter.
Thank you, all three of you, for coming in, making the case, and I'm sure not just my respect, but the respect of all of our viewers and listeners for what you've done for this country. Now, I never thought I'd sit here and say the SAS are too soft, but there's no point pushing for derogation. We should just leave the ECHR. No one needs to teach us in this country about liberty and freedom, and the point is we have guys like the SAS to defend those very principles. We're going to stick with the defence theme, very much indeed. We're going to talk in a moment about the Chagos Islands and why on earth would an American president want to urge a British government to do this? And has David Lammy even thought about what might happen if Donald Trump wins on November the 5th? And what about the rights and the views of the Chagosians themselves, who it appears haven't even had a proper negotiation with the British government?
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. Looking ahead, and by Thursday, things are looking largely dry, but quite a bit colder than of late. For the time being, though, still plenty of wet weather around. Low pressure dominating the story across the UK. It's this low pressure that has brought all the heavy thundery showers many of us have seen through today, and there will be some further showers as we go through the next few hours across England and Wales, but many of them clearing away towards the east overnight. Some persistent rain continuing, though, across parts of northern England and eastern Scotland, so staying pretty soggy here. With quite a bit of cloud around, temperatures won't drop a huge amount, especially in the towns and cities, many places holding up in double figures. There will be generally fewer showers around tomorrow, but there will be some. In fact, even from the start across far southern parts of England, a few showers quite likely, perhaps a little bit drier across central southern parts of Wales and the Midlands for a time, but further north, northern England, plenty of wet weather around, some outbreaks of rain which could be quite heavy, and more persistent rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland. A very soggy start to the day here. As we go through the day, the rain across parts of Scotland and northern England will continue for a time, but it should start to break up as we go through into the afternoon and early evening. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers around, not as many as we've seen through today, and they're not looking quite as intense, less likely to have the odd rumble of thunder, but still some heavy ones possible. And temperatures in the north starting to drop down as we get a northerly wind making its way across the country. That northerly wind then will push its way southwards across pretty much the whole of the country as we go through Thursday, and so that means it is going to be a chillier day, but much fewer showers around. In fact, it's looking largely dry. Yes, some showers around coastal parts, but many places having a dry day on Thursday and sticking with that drier theme until the weekend. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, the Chagos Islands was, of course, debated in Parliament yesterday, but what's become very clear is that the Chagosians themselves, who, of course, were, taken off the island and given a rough deal, the Brits did, in the end, try to make it up a bit to them by offering 10,000 of them the right to UK citizenship. But it seems that this whole handover has not even been discussed with that community. I'm joined by Jean-Francois Nellen, spokesman at Chagosian Voices. Is this correct? And welcome to the programme. Have there been any proper negotiations with your community?
Hi, good evening, Nigel. And that's correct. There were no proper consultation with the community. Monday before, I had a meeting with the Foreign Minister, Stephen Doughty, and he clearly said he's not going to talk about negotiation. That's because it's still ongoing. 3 days later, I had an email from BBC asking for an interview. And that's how we learn about the handover of our island to Mauritius.
Well, I guess you're probably feeling angrier than any other group here. I mean, if this goes to Mauritius, do you see that the Mauritian government might be helpful towards you?
No, well, if we go all the way back to from the beginning, when same Labour government who forcibly removed the Chagosian from the island, sent to Mauritius and the Seychelles, there were compensation which was given at the time to the Mauritian government to give to the Chagosian. And that was held from the Mauritian government until the women from the Chagosian community started doing like a hunger strike. And they were beaten by the Mauritian police and gas because they were asking for the compensation. But some of them received peanuts. And the people that were sent to the Seychelles, they have not received a penny until today. And all those money which was given by the UK government to Mauritius, the Mauritian government kept it. They have built the University of Mauritius, developed the country, but nothing for the Chagosian. And how can we trust the government now? Besides, Stephen Doughty has said they are doing a trust fund for the Chagosian in Mauritius. Most of the Chagosian coming to the UK, who's going to use that money in Mauritius?
So, just to be clear, the dream is, and I know you're third generation, down the line, but the dream is for the community to be free to move back to the islands.
Correct. And like we've been saying to both, Tory, Labour, we want to go back. All of us, majority of us want to go back under the British protection. We are not asking much by this current government. We ask a self-determination, a right to decide of our future. Just give us that right. People from the Falkland have the right to decide. People from Gibraltar have the right to decide. Just do a referendum. Don't bargain with our land with Mauritius.
I have to say, Jean-Francois, you make a very powerful and emotive argument, and I thank you for coming on GB News and making it. Well, George, you know, it was pretty harsh what happened to them, wasn't it? I know that Tam Dalyell, Labour MP for many, many years, was campaigning on behalf of these Chagossians. It is astonishing that Labour can do this without even talking to them.
Do you know, I mean, it wasn't just Tam. One of the biggest champions of, not my necessarily best friend in politics, was Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, was it?
And he was campaigning on that for many years. Look, I think there are two elements to this. The first one is our relationship with the United States.
Quite.
And the second one is the rights of those people who want to return and whether or not they'll be allowed to. And then I guess beyond that, there's a whole strategic thing about, you know, where it's located and what its importance is. For what it's worth, I mean, I accept, as you said, it was a powerful case that was just made.
Very emotive. And self-determination,
yes.
Those of us that believe in liberty and freedom and democracy of a nation state, we champion this.
Absolutely. And, I mean, but secondly, we can't just ignore the fact that the United States are our closest, or one of our closest allies. Having said that, they're not always easy to deal with. I spent 11 years on the Intelligence and Security Committee and spent a lot of time talking to politicians in the United States, and they don't always respect the importance of some issues for us that are of lesser importance to them. And so it is a difficult relationship to maintain.
You know, Biden apparently has approved this on the basis that the United Nations Maritime Court might say that we shouldn't be there and therefore we might get kicked out of the islands. It's nonsense, isn't it, Christopher?
It's sovereign British territory, so however much these courts might try to issue definitive or binding judgments, and so far it's only a non-binding one, the fact is it's sovereign British territory. It's none of their business. That's the first point. Second point is that it was the Americans in the first place, as I understand it, who asked us to remove the Chagossians so that they could put that Argentinian
and that's true, isn't it?
Diego Garcia base in there. Yeah. And now the Americans are turning around and say, right, now you must kick the British out. Now, this is...
It's crazy.
It's partly
crazy.
because Biden is absolutely in China's pocket. And if you look at all the catastrophic foreign policy decisions and influences he's had, every single one of them has been to the advantage of China. There's a very strong link between the Biden family and the Chinese, business-wise, and I think that's what's gone on here. The Chinese, as you know, are looking to expand their military bases everywhere. They would love to get the Americans out of Diego Garcia and replace it with themselves, and Mauritius is very friendly with China.
Well,
that's what's really going on, but here's an opportunity for reform, Nigel. I don't think that a Prime Minister is allowed by executive action to hand away sovereign British territory.
Well, this came up yesterday, and David Lammy has said there will now, and whether they originally planned to do it, but there will be a debate and an Act of Parliament.
A debate is, it's got to be an Act of Parliament, that's the point.
It's got to be an Act of Parliament. What is interesting about this is I spoke last night to a retired naval commander, American naval commander, who's a good friend of Donald Trump, who, if you believe the betting markets, is favourite to win. But hey, who knows what's going to happen in a few days' time. But very odd for the British government to make this decision right ahead of an American election, given, as you say yourself, the importance of the relationship.
Well, you know, I've not been privy to any of the conversations that have taken place. What I do know, and I'm talking now about the people who will have been involved in this, John Healey will have a very strong concern about the strategic importance of this. David Lammy, who took a bit of a hammering apparently in Parliament yesterday, but I know that David is very, very careful to maintain the relationship with the United States, regardless of who wins the election.
Yes. I think he is.
Yes.
No, I think he is, which is why I think it's a mistake to have done this, because I sense the Trump administration may take a different view. Now, slight change of gear here. Well, we're going to move actually from discussing the Chagos Islands to my What the Farage moment of the day, which involves a Ferrari. Yes, it does. Let's have a look at these pictures. twice been deported from the country, and he's come back into the country again, and there he is in a 300 grand car. Now, he may well have earned the money through good, honest, hard labour. No, of course he didn't, and we know that. And we can't kick him out because we're waiting to hear his asylum case, which might take goodness knows how long. But we're being made mugs of, aren't we?
Completely.
Well,
oh, come on.
It doesn't look, the look of it is not good.
What do you mean, not good at all?
But I mean, you know, is this a story that merits the attention we're giving it now? I don't think it necessarily is.
Well,
as you said, if he's earned the money honestly.
No, he hasn't. He hasn't. Look, he's been kicked out twice, right? So he's not here legally, so he's not legally allowed to work. So this is not honest, well, unless he's earned it in Albania, but it's pretty, I don't know, we'll see. Christopher?
No, the fact is...
Aren't we back to the first debate this evening?
This is sending completely the wrong signal. What we're effectively saying is Britain is open to any government that wishes to deport to us its mental defectives, its criminals, send them all to Britain and we'll let them in. And that, if you send that signal, the cost to the British nation, not just in money but in national identity, which is becoming diluted by the sheer scale of this. And it also does raise the question whether we should any longer have anything to do with the so-called European so-called Court of so-called human so-called rights.
And a quick last point for a final comment from my panel. The Chancellor is being urged to scrap free prescriptions for people aged 60 to 65 to sort of normalise prescriptions with retirement age. Is this the right thing to do, George?
Do you know, on your programme a few weeks ago, we had a conversation about the winter fuel payments, and I made the point at the time that, you know, universal benefits, they're not always the most popular with the younger generation, but they are easier to manage. And so I think that needs to be taken into account. Having said that, you know, a lot of people in the meantime have said to me about the winter fuel payments, and I think the same people would say it about this. Well, actually, I don't need it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm 60 and I don't need it. I mean, that is absolutely for certain. Would it make sense to regularise it with the pension age?
I think that kind of tidying up, it sounds very good in theory, but what really needs to happen is to make sure that those who actually need benefits get them, and those who actually don't need them don't get
well,
them.
no, I agree with that completely, and I do wonder with winter fuel why we can't link it to how much tax people are paying. There must be a way through. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me this evening. In a moment, I'll be joined by a leading London wine merchant. We're going to taste a glass of white wine. We're going to talk about alcohol taxes introduced by the last government, which are very, very complicated and could threaten up to 900 independent wine merchants in this country. And I guess, in a way, you can take the next segment as a pre-budget plea coming from the wine industry.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Right, we're having beans this morning.
Beans for breakfast. There's no better breakfast, is there?
I like beans on toast for breakfast.
So do I. I would actually call myself a baked beans connoisseur.
Would you? Well, we can put you to the test. Tell us what the story is.
The story is, you might think beans, you might think Heinz. Heinz means beans.
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Heinz means beans. Who knows? So, of all of the supermarket baked beans, it is actually the Aldi supermarket version, this version over here, which came out on top. The Bramwell's baked beans, 76% on the taste test.
And they're much cheaper as well.
Much cheaper. Households can save, if you're buying 2 cans a week, £100 a year buying the Aldi version of these baked beans. So we thought we're going to do a blind taste test this morning.
Yes.
To see.
So we've got the Aldi beans, we've got M&S beans, and we've got beans Heinz. So I think number 2 is the best one.
Yeah, I agree.
Right,
you came first best to me.
So the Heinz is number 3.
Interesting.
Which was the worst one?
Which is the worst one, which is the ones, actually, I'll buy it home.
Do you know what? That's just proven it. M&S was number one. And Aldi was number two, which was our favourite as well.
I said M&S.
Yeah, and we both said Aldi.
We did say Aldi. I have to be honest, I was not expecting that.
I told you. This is the hill I will die on. These are the beans that I get at home and I love them.
At university, you get the
tin that's half that size, and it was 21p for the store ones and 23p for Heinz baked beans. And as I say, the key was in the thickness of the sauce and how hard the beans were.
They actually are really nice.
Stunning.
They're really, I am
Stunning.
really surprised, and we buy more than 2 cans a week, so it saved me a couple of £100.
We get through 2 cans.
So you like the
in
Aldi
the city.
ones?
I like the Aldi ones.
Okay.
I'm shocked.
They're a lot
There you go.
cheaper. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30am.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
On the average bottle of wine that you buy and drink at home, the tax is about 50%, in fact slightly more than 50%. But a series of very complicated alcohol taxes designed, I think, to tax stronger alcohol more than weaker alcohol. And I have to say, I've read through it all and I'm completely bemused as to why the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, thought this was a good idea. Well, I wonder what it means for the industry, and I wonder whether Labour might simplify and might reduce alcohol taxes. I'm joined by Ed Hume-Kendall of Montrachet Fine Wine Merchants, and it seemed only appropriate
well,
to say cheers and welcome to the programme. Now, looking through the numbers here, this is bedevilingly complex as to whether it's 12.5% alcohol by volume or 14%. What does it all mean?
Well, up until around a year ago, actually it was all pretty simple. All still wine in the UK was taxed at around 27 quid a case. Whether that wine was...
So £2.50 something a bottle.
Yeah, exactly. Whether that wine was, you know, a Trockenbeer and Auslese at 7% or an Amarone at 15.5%, it was all the same rate of duty. A year ago, the government brought in plans to stagger the rate depending on the amount of alcohol in each bottle of wine. However, crucially, the wines between 11.5% and 14.5% were all taxed at the same rate. So, although some outliers, you know, for instance,
so most wines would come within that.
Yeah, exactly. The majority of wines came within that. Now, what is apparently being proposed, or what has been proposed, is from February there are going to be 7 tax bands from between 11.5% and 14.5%.
And for you as independent, about 900 independent wine merchants, that is, I mean, in bureaucratic terms, damned expensive.
I mean, it's an administrative nightmare. I mean, the last year, it's been a sort of tester, I suppose, and it's been a complete nightmare. And now that every single wine is going to be in this tiered system, it's just going to create real problems for us, and it's not the easiest market to sell wine in.
And an increasing amount of it, of course, also UK-produced wines as well.
Well, exactly, yes, of course. And it's going to hit UK producers and it's going to hit UK merchants, and at a time when we really don't need it.
Well, here's your opportunity on national television to look into the camera and make your plea to Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor.
Yes. Rachel Reeves, if you're watching this evening, it would be very much appreciated if you could keep the current rate of tax as it is, and certainly not increase it, because it could be a complete nightmare for British producers.
Quite right, and I just to think there are 7 bands within that. I mean, the whole thing is unbelievable. I must finish off by asking you: there's been a growth of alcohol-free drinks being produced, and there's one. Which is an Irish stout, you can probably guess the name at home, who are doing a 0 alcohol, which I have to say is really quite tolerable and really quite good. There are some 0% gins out there that really aren't bad. What's happening in the wine world?
Well, you know,
or would it wreck it?
I unfortunately at the moment, I mean, I've not had an alcohol-free wine that I've enjoyed. I think the fundamental problem is for a beer, you're only reducing it from 3% to 0%. With a wine, you're reducing it from 12% to the minimum to naught, and that just it takes out the soul and the real character that makes a wine what it is, and so fundamentally, I don't think it's possible.
Montrachet, you know, you are named, of course, after a part of France known for its exceptionally good wines. How good is English wine?
I think it's certainly improved a hell of a lot over the last over the last 10 years even. And sparkling wines certainly, you know, I think a lot of them do challenge champagne. However, they're already priced up accordingly. Some of them, so you know you're paying 40 quid a bottle, which is the same as you're paying for a decent champagne. I think in time, as yields start getting higher, we'll see that price come down. But yeah, there's certainly some very interesting things going on at the moment.
Well, thank you for coming on the programme.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck with it all. Well, it's all those ghastly Tories who were in the last Parliament that have done all of this, including, of course, my colleague on my right.
All my fault.
I mean, when you just listen to the case, the argument that's being made, that they're about to introduce 7 different tax bands.
It is the problem of thinking that if you apply something that is utterly logical, it will work in a human system. I've already had an email from Majestic saying they're going to have their prices up because they're going to have to spend a 6-figure sum on their software to implement this scheme. And so you put prices up, you make life more difficult for people, and it's all about the efficiency of government rather than allowing people to get on with their lives, which you and I want to do.
And, of course, it favours the big guys because they'll bear the cost. But the little independents, it makes it much, much harder.
All regulation favours big players and penalises small players.
Well, we learned that from our membership of the European Union, didn't we not?
And annoyingly, this is a Brexit benefit. We can only do this because we've left the European Union, which is slightly infuriating.
Well, Brexit gives us the right to manage or mismanage our own country.
Indeed.
Jacob, what have you got coming up tonight?
We'll be talking about further mismanagement, and that is frightening off all the millionaires from the UK. And Charlie Mullins, well known for Pimlico Plumbers, is going to come on, have a word with him about why he's leaving. You know, patriotic people feel they can't afford to live in this country. And that means you cut jobs, you cut tax revenue, and you end up cutting public services. It's a really bad...
It is stone bonkers, but of course, started by the last government. I just have to emphasise that. I'm done. Back with you tomorrow. First, though, before Jacob, let's get the weather with Alex Burkill.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. Looking ahead, and by Thursday, things are looking largely dry, but quite a bit colder than of late. For the time being, though, still plenty of wet weather around. Low pressure dominating the story across the UK. It's this low pressure that has brought all the heavy thundery showers many of us have seen through today, and there will be some further showers as we go through the next few hours across England and Wales, but many of them clearing away towards the east overnight. Some persistent rain continuing there across parts of northern England and eastern Scotland, so staying pretty soggy here. With quite a bit of cloud around, temperatures won't drop a huge amount, especially in the towns and cities, many places holding up in double figures. There will be generally fewer showers around tomorrow, but there will be some. In fact, even from the start across far southern parts of England, a few showers quite likely, perhaps a little bit drier across central southern parts of Wales and the Midlands for a time, but further north, northern England, plenty of wet weather around, some outbreaks of rain which could be quite heavy, and more persistent rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland. A very soggy start to the day here. As we go through the day, the rain across parts of Scotland and northern England will continue for a time, but it should start to break up as we go through into the afternoon and early evening. Elsewhere, a scattering of showers around, not as many as we've seen through today, and they're not looking quite as intense, less likely to have the odd rumble of thunder, but still some heavy ones possible. And temperatures in the north starting to drop down as we get a northerly wind making making its way across the country. That northerly wind then will push its way southwards across pretty much the whole of the country as we go through Thursday, and so that means it is going to be a chillier day, but much fewer showers around. In fact, it's looking largely dry. Yes, some showers around coastal parts, but many places having a dry day on Thursday and sticking with that drier theme until the weekend. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us.